Hi, we're here today to talk to you about the diversity of disability, and our group is Brianna Cochran, Kelly Eveland, Ashley Sees, and Hannah Wilson. The population we are working with are those who have a disability. There are many forms of disabilities, such as cognitive disabilities, hearing loss, invisible, physical, psychological disabilities, and much more. We chose this population because it is so diverse and unfortunately discriminated against very often. Many people who belong to this population fall victim to discrimination, oppression, being ridiculed, and being denied basic rights. It can happen at home, school, or any other public place. As future social workers, it is important for us to become knowledgeable about populations that need our help the most. Having extensive knowledge on the populations that we are serving can make being an advocate much easier. You cannot change what you do not acknowledge. Autism spectrum disorders can cause significant social, communication, and behavioral challenges. Some challenging aspects of it are a lack of emotion, attachment problems, lack of eye contact. They may underreact to pain, and they may also engage in bizarre body movements. There are also difficulties with processing. One type of it is Asperger's syndrome and also autism. Asperger's is generally less mild than autism. It is more of a social interaction disorder. Autism is more severe than Asperger's and generally affects one's social interactions and may cause them to engage in bizarre behaviors such as rapid arm movement, head movement, blurting out phrases, repetition, and other motions. One of our interviews was with Ashley's cousin, Holden. He is severely autistic, and it affects every aspect of his life. He is 16, and he currently lives in a group home. His autism has caused him to have severe outbursts that make it unsafe for him to be at home, and it's also unsafe for his parents. His mood swings come at random times, where he switches from happy to angry, and his most common mood when he is home is angry. He tends to lack emotion for others. He frequently harms himself, and in particular his father, and has no feelings afterwards. His violence is definitely provoked by his autism, but we know that he's in there somewhere. He has an exceptional memory. He often carries a huge handful of ripped papers and photos in his hand. The second one piece falls or goes missing, he automatically knows which one it is, and he can feel the difference of the weight in his hand. That is a trait of autism because occasionally those with autism can experience a heightened intelligence in diverse areas, such as memorizing, counting, and math. Growing up, Holden was discriminated against all the time. People often stare at him because he is different, and surprising, the word retarded is used often to describe him. At school, it is apparent that Holden is different from the other kids. In high school, people tended to be judgmental, so he got bullied a lot. He lives in a group home due to him being too violent while he is living with his parents, and the group home he belongs in empowers him so much. They are able to teach him there, and he's with other children who have similar disabilities, so it's a very positive and caring environment that he is in now. The aspect from our text that encourages stereotypes for the population we are working with are developmental milestones, along with any other theory that includes things such as, at this age, you should be doing X, Y, and Z, such as Erikson's developmental theory and Levinson's. The text states during each stage of life from infancy throughout adulthood, normal people are generally capable of performing tasks. While using this phrase normal people, it automatically claims that people who do not meet this developmental guideline is not normal, and this automatically places a stigma on those who do not meet these milestones. In society, there are many offensive terms that people use, which also upholds the negative view that there is on the disabled population. The best thing that seems to have happened for Holden was moving him into a group home because he was surrounded by people who care about him. For children, with autism, school can be a very scary place to be. And although Holden does have severe autism, he is still a lovable person. So we hope to see days where people with disabilities are looked at as equal, because they are in our eyes. One of the categories that fall under the umbrella of disability is invisible disabilities. And these are symptoms such as debilitating pain, fatigue, dizziness, learning differences, mental health disorders, and just generally these are not obvious to the onlooker, but they can sometimes or always limit daily activities, and they range from mild challenges to severe limitations. Here are some examples of those conditions: Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, migraines, epilepsy, fibromyalgia, Crohn's disease, and rheumatoid arthritis. Our second interview was with my partner, Thomas. He has POTS, which is postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, which is under the umbrella of dysautonomia. Dysautonomia is a disability that affects your autonomic functions. For him, it affects his blood flow, energy creation, and digestion. This means that when he is sitting and has his legs down, the blood pools in his feet. So when he stands up, he's more inclined to pass out because there's no blood actively flowing throughout his body. It also affects his energy creation because the mitochondria in his cells do not actively produce energy for him. So he has to rely on adrenaline most of the time, which makes him very energetic, and it can be hard for him to slow down at night. So sometimes he can stay up until 4 or 5 a.m. just because he can't sleep, because he always has adrenaline pumping through him, since his body naturally cannot create energy. It also impacts his digestion. It can make it go either really fast or really slow. So some days he can eat 4 or 5 times a day and still be hungry. And then there's other periods of time where he has to wait maybe 2 days before he feels hungry again. In terms of discrimination from my partner, it took him over a year to be diagnosed officially by a doctor because most of them didn't believe him. He started showing symptoms of his condition when he was 12. He tried to get up to go to school one day, got up, and instantly passed out, collapsed into bed, and was unable to move. Obviously, he knew something was wrong. His parents took him to a doctor, and the doctor prescribed him sugar pills and told his mom not to tell him that because the doctor believed it was all in his head and that my partner was just nervous about going to school and that he was just making everything up because he didn't want to go to school. It wasn't that something was actually wrong with him. But after a year of persistence, he finally got his diagnosis of having POTS, which is a generally under-researched condition because it's fairly new. So it was very difficult for them to find someone who was a specialist in his diagnosis. His school almost brought him to court for truancy, despite his parents providing them with documentation that he was disabled. He was physically unable to attend class for about 2 years, 2.5 years or so. And after an extensive legal battle with his school, they finally surrendered and gave him a tutor for those 2.5 years he was out of school. But it was for 6 to 8 hours a week for him to learn all of his course materials. So that's 5 or 6 classes. He had to learn all of the material for it in 6 hours compared to what students get nowadays. To broaden it out to people who generally do have invisible disabilities, what kind of discrimination they can face. More frequently, it occurs because the individual does not have an easily detectable issue. For example, having to use a handicap parking spot. I have a friend who has fibromyalgia, and it's difficult for her to walk long distances because of her constant pain. So she has a handicap sticker that she uses. She was going to go to the grocery store, and someone saw her get out of her car and made a comment to her about how such a pretty young thing doesn't need a handicap spot. And then she came out and found out that her car had been keyed. So just because the person couldn't see that she was actively disabled, they just assumed nothing was wrong with her. In addition, there are ways that people are discriminated against in terms of education, because if they can't attend class, for example, like my partner, and they don't have a apparent physical issue, some people might not believe that, and they might just be making it up as like a reason to skip class. It can also affect their ability to be employed, because sometimes they just physically cannot work. And some people say that as, oh, well, you get to lay around all day, you're so lucky. But they don't understand how ingrained in our culture being able to work is. So they just lose that aspect of their life. It can also damage the relationships people have with their friends and family. I know in particular, my partner had a very strained relationship with his father, because his father also did not believe that he was disabled even after his diagnosis. And his father blamed him for their family's financial situation because his mom had quit working in order to take care of him. So they started struggling financially. So his dad thought that it was his fault for faking his disability.
Disability culture. What is disability culture? This term refers to movements and subcultures that support the concept a disability can be a part of or all of one's identity. Disability can be compared to race, sexual orientation, or even religion. The point of these movements is to show you can have pride and to take back the term disability, instead of being looked at someone who is broken or needing to be cured. Individuals with disabilities have been socially taught to look at themselves as only their disability. Disability culture is a way to change that social stereotype, and that's one's disability is up to them to define and to determine their life. Disability in the U.S. How many people are considered disabled in the U.S.? According to the U.S. Census Bureau reports, about 56.7 million people, 19% of the population, had a disability in 2010. This is about 20% of the U.S. population, or about 1 in 5 people. Ways society isn't built for disabilities. Unfortunately, the U.S. has yet to make full changes to include individuals with disabilities comfortably in a bodied-abled society. For example, in New York City, there are nearly 13,000 cabs for a city with nearly 20 million people, yet only 29 of those cabs are handicap accessible. A recent government study, the first of its kind, revealed that people with disabilities are 50% more likely to be victims of violent crimes. Both of these examples show that society still today has not progressed to include individuals with disabilities in a way that is comfortable and happy for the individual. Disability in the U.S. continued. How are individuals with disabilities treated within society? Unfortunately, not everyone in society looks at individuals with disabilities as people, which is what they are, human beings. A recent government study reported that strangers victimized 24% of non-disabled women, but the number jumped to 34% for their disabled counterparts. Lawrence Carter Long, the coordinator for the Disability Network of New York, stated in an interview in 2007, "There is a tendency to patronize people with disabilities. You can either be treated like a child or like an idiot." The statement made by Lawrence Carter Long is something that I believe quite a few individuals treat individuals with disabilities with. I've seen within my own personal life, individuals treat my cousin like a child, even though he has his own place, he has his own job, his own income, and his own life. And if he was a child, he would not be able to support himself fully. This is something that I feel needs to be changed, is this stereotype and this ability to place this on individuals with disabilities. Disability in U.S. politics. You would hope the individuals leading our government or country would have a more mature outlook on individuals with disabilities, right? Sadly, not everyone is. White House Chief of Staff Rahm Emanuel recently found himself in hot water after using the derogatory phrase effing retarded to describe liberal activists in a closed-door strategy session in 2009. After receiving a lot of responses about his wording choice, he later apologized publicly to the head of the Special Olympics, Ted Shriver. Yet, not even 2 months later, on The Tonight Show with Jay Leno, President Obama laughed that his poor bowling score was like a Special Olympics or something. He was speaking about Emanuel himself. I find this highly appalling that not even the White House Chief of Staff, but our President of the United States was making fun or making light of something as serious as disability, because for individuals who have these disabilities, this isn't something light. This isn't something that they can just push to the side. This is their life. Disability in U.S. politics continued. With Trump being elected into presidency, there was controversial moments in his campaign where he was accused of targeting a disabled individual. While speaking at a rally in South Carolina, Trump began speaking about an article written by Serge Kovaleski. He states that article was written by a nice reporter guy. Then continued to say, "Now the poor guy, you ought to see the guy. I don't know what I said. I don't remember." He's going, "I don't remember. Maybe that's what I said." And I say that in a tone that almost is exactly like Trump's as he was speaking about the situation. In context, this could be somehow interpreted as Trump simply disagreeing and said Kovaleski was inconsistent. But the action his body took while imitating Kovaleski was something you would hope no president would do. He imitated Kovaleski's disability. He has a disability where his joints don't function the way everybody else's who do not have this disability do. There is no definite proof Trump was imitating Kovaleski, but these actions of Donald Trump make it seem to other individuals acting this way about disabled individuals is acceptable. This could have unintentionally opened a wormhole of hate and discrimination against this population. Culture. Mental retardation or intellectual disability is a condition characterized by intellectual functioning that is significantly below average and accompanying deficits in adaptive functioning, both which occurred before the age of 18. In the disability world, people in this community dislike the word retardation because of its origin, which was used to discriminate against the population. The word intellectual disabilities has well been replaced with the term DD, which is developmental disabilities. People with DD have a hard time living on their own, helping themselves, learning, being mobile, and learning language. People with no disability sometimes struggle to not only think about this group as people with a disability, but they forget that this group are just people. Culture continued. DD people usually get categorized into one category, meaning that all people with disabilities act the same. Each person has their own strengths and potentials. What are people with disabilities like? They can easily be distracted and have a hard time paying attention. They have a difficult time memorizing. Some take longer mastering language skills. Hard for them organizing their thoughts and thinking ahead. Not having enough motivation to finish a task because they are used to defeat and failure. Their social development is poor due to self-esteem, and so they act out and become loud to gain attention. Americans with Disabilities Act. The Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, was put in place to bring social and economic justice for people with disabilities to access public places, work settings, and the mainstreams of public life. The ADA wants to improve the DD community by bringing them justice, and how they do that is by Title I and II, forbid job and employment discrimination, making sure they get recruited, hired, equal pay, and other benefits. This also includes transportation, recreation, healthcare, and voting. Work. The work community is just one of many things that DD people have to worry about when it comes to being treated fairly and being respected by their peers. They don't get treated fairly or respected most of the time, mainly because only 35% of this population has jobs. Some get hired, but jobs are not required to hire anybody they feel wouldn't fit their work requirements. 18% receive insufficient healthcare service. Most healthcare providers don't care for them or give them the right services, while 22% of those who are employed report having been victimized by discrimination in some situation. They can face discrimination in their home, by healthcare providers, by the public, or even by their own family. Social workers. Social workers in this community, we can be a voice and help make life better for this population. This profession can help assist, solve, and help make decisions for this group of people. Educate them on how to help themselves when it comes to their own personal care or personal relationships. We could even coordinate their life to oversee support services. But advocating is the biggest support any social worker can do for this group. This could be through raising awareness on how to treat DD people or what to expect from this population, unlike what society has taught them to expect. To conclude, having a disability impacts all realms of one's life. Advocacy and empowerment are our main tools as social workers to help fight discrimination. For social workers, it is important to remember that the client is the expert on their own experience. There are many organizations out there to help people of all conditions. Ultimately, you do not know everything about a person just by looking at them. I myself remember this, and I'm asking you. Remember the old saying, don't judge a book by its cover? This applies.